back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I'm here today to do a joint review of 3 books that I've recently read. All of them are fantasy. The first one is Pyre, which is by Naomi Novik. The second one is The Pyre, which is by David Hare. And the third one is Oversi Under Stone by Susan Cooper. So let's start off with this one, which is Oversi Under Stone. Sigh. I did not like this book. I actually gave this book 1 star, which is not good. I think it might be my first 1 star of the year. I didn't like this at all. I just thought it was bad. I read this with Chelsea and Elizabeth, who both host the Magical Space Pussycat podcast with me, and we picked this one because we thought it would be a fun read, a kind of kids classic fantasy story, and it just was awful. It was really bad. I think if you were a kid and you were reading this for the first time and you were sort of just getting into reading and fantasy, you'd probably enjoy this, because I don't think you would see the problems that I had with it as a child. The problems I had with it mostly stem from the fact that it is incredibly racist, it is homophobic, it is really misogynistic, it is definitely filled with stereotypes, so like really bad stereotypes, and I just felt like this did not hold up well to the modern age, let's put it that way. It is an older book, so it definitely is more of a product of its time. It was written in 1965, so yes, it's a product of its time. But even so, I have read other books from the 60s that were a lot better on these topics and did not come across in the way that this book did. This book follows 3 young children who go on an adventure to find a holy grail. They find a map when they go to their great uncle Mary's house, and this map is decaying, it's super ancient, super old, but they manage to decipher it and they decide that they are going on a hunt for the holy grail of Arthur, King Arthur, and they believe that it's going to be a big adventure and they're going to have their summer holidays filled with fun in the Cornish coast, and that's basically what happens. They, along the way, meet some adversaries, some characters who are of different minorities, different ethnic groups, or are lower class, and these characters are the bad guys in this book. Very stereotypical, very racist, very classist. It's not great, as I say, but again, you wouldn't realise this as a child. So these 3 kids, who are 2 boys, Barney and Simon, and their sister Jane, they're all siblings, and they go and they run around this big old house and they have adventures on the coast and they try and escape these evil people who are after them. It's very black and white, it's very reminiscent of a kind of childhood growing up in the Cornish landscape, so if you have that experience then you'd probably get a fairly reminiscent feeling from this, and there are moments that I thought this was an interesting enough story. It was very nicely described when it was describing the landscapes, the scenery, but the story itself and the children themselves and the characters and the way it's portrayed is really, really bad. It just did not fill me with confidence that this is a book that lots of children in the 60s would have read, because it's just so bad, and a lot of the ideas that are portrayed in this are really, really wrong to me, and I just felt like it was making me feel a bit ill reading these opinions as though they were fact. We have the children in this story constantly referred to as white-haired and blue-eyed, and we have the other main characters who are evil as like brown-haired, nasty-looking people, coloured skin, natives. It's just not nice. It's really not nice, and it's bad by today's standards. So, I mean, the adventure's there, it's an adventure story, and it's set in Britain, but it is awful. And if you want to know more of my spoilery thoughts, there will be a Magical Space Pussycats episode on this in a few weeks, hopefully, so, you know, if you want to follow that up, then you'll see our thoughts there. But this was bad. Like, seriously bad. I just did not enjoy it at all, and I don't think there are many redeeming qualities in this. The adventure itself is quite bad in my opinion because it's really simplistic, but again, as a child, maybe you wouldn't feel that way. For me, it didn't work, so 1 star. Let's just chuck it away right now. I'm gonna give this straight to charity, so yeah, it's not for me. Moving on to better things then. The next book I have to talk about is The Pyre. This is by David Hare and it's the first book in the Return of Ravana series. I picked this one up because I've read David Hare's other series, which you can see up here. It's the Moontide Quartet series. That's an adult fantasy, whereas this is a YA. I really enjoy David Hare's style because he uses Eastern and Western influence, and this book and this series in particular, it has a very Indian influence to it. It's set in India itself. The story is focused on an ancient myth which is called the Ramayana. It's a real myth that a lot of Hindu people believe in, and it's about reincarnation, and this myth and this story is quite integral to Hindu culture. So this book is inspired by that. It's inspired by the idea of reincarnation and the creatures and characters within that myth. I've never read that myth myself, but since reading this I've heard about it. So it's set in India, all of the characters are Indian and they have different religious beliefs. Some of them are Hindu, some of them are Sikh. It's definitely something that I would say if you want to learn a bit more about Indian culture. Yes, David Hare is not Indian, it's not an Own Voices book, but he definitely has researched pretty well from what I understand, and it seems as though lots of people seem to enjoy this take on Indian culture and mixing it with fantasy. This follows two different timelines. So we have the ancient timeline, which follows a king and his various wives, and we're following a man in this storyline who is called Aram Dupe, I believe. And the time period that he's in, it's very common to have bloodthirsty kings doing tyrannical deeds, and that is very much the case with the king in this story. He, when he dies, decides he would like all of his queens to be burned on the stake with him. So he orders this, and Aram Dupe manages to steal away one of the queens. It starts off a really strange, crazy reincarnation ritual that hundreds of years later we follow three children who are supposedly the reincarnations of some of these people from this ancient story, and they're being chased and hunted by this evil, scorned king through the ages, through various lives and various life cycles, and that's kind of the adventure. It definitely found the culture elements of this book and the world building to be something I was fascinated with. I do not know very much about Indian culture, I still don't, but this book opened my eyes to the fact that I really would like to learn more, and it's a fascinating culture. Hindu and Indian culture intertwine quite nicely in this, and we also get some look at some different family types, some different setups of living situations, and I think the background elements of this story worked really, really well. I also think that the adventure elements were pretty fun, and even though some moments are slightly predictable because this is a series he wrote before the Moontide Quartet and possibly was not as developed at, I still found it a lot of fun to read and a lot of great moments happened within it. I do think there are some kind of annoying romance things in this one which I didn't love. There's a lot of insta-love and there's a bit of a sort of love triangle, which is not my thing at all. But if you took the romance out, I think it would be a really strong story. I do have the second one in this series to read, so I'm excited to go into that, and I will be continuing on with the books. And I ended up giving this one in particular a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so I do think it's a series that if you want to know about fantasy in India, try out this one because it's a lot of fun. If you have any recommendations for me on either Indian non-fiction books that kind of explore the history, or fantasy which is set in either India or inspired by Indian culture, written by an Indian author, or any of those sorts of things, then do let me know because it's something I would love to know a bit more about. I feel very undereducated when it comes to Indian culture and lifestyle, but this has piqued my interest considerably. The last one I have to review for you guys in this video is Tyrell, which is the first book in the Tyrell series by Naomi Novik. It's also called His Majesty's Dragon in the US and places, but this edition it's called Tyrell, so we'll go with that. I definitely was a little unsure going into this book because I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik a while ago and I didn't like that very much, but this one is completely different and way more what I love. So I would describe this kind of as a fantasy of manners kind of story. It definitely has a feeling of upper class citizenship mixed with magic, and we're following a sea captain who is called Lawrence. He is in the Navy, he's fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, which is the time period this is set in, and he and his crew are kind of on the brink of discovering something brilliant, possibly getting promoted. He's really happy with where he is in life, but he kind of feels slightly incomplete and he doesn't really know why. He and his crew manage to capture a ship, a French ship, which they take an item from, which is heavily guarded, and this item turns out to be an unhatched dragon egg. When they take it on their ship, decides it's going to hatch into a dragon, and the dragon is called Temeraire. And Temeraire and Lawrence bond and form a friendship that is basically unbreakable because Lawrence becomes the dragon rider for Temeraire. This book is basically what I wanted the Anne McCaffrey book to be. The Anne McCaffrey book I read ages ago, I wanted that to be this. This book is so good. And what is so good about this book is not only the fact that it's a fantasy of manners, which is something I'm really enjoying recently, but also the fact that it's a bond that is so special between a human and a dragon. I think the brotherly love, the loyalty, the friendship, the trust that forms between these two characters, Lawrence and Temeraire, is beautiful. It is palpably beautiful. It is just so lovely to read about two males having a really lovely friendship, even if one of them's a dragon. Like, we'll disregard that. It's lovely to see two males having a friendship that is so unbreakable and so just joyous. And we follow Temeraire and Lawrence as they go into training to try and figure out how they're supposed to bond and how they're supposed to defend England's borders using the dragons, and they meet some of the other dragon riders and some of the other people who are going to be doing the same sort of job as them, some of the other dragons. The great thing about this is the dragons themselves are sentient, so we get to see Temeraire's thoughts as much as Lawrence's, and the bond that they form is great, but also the story is really fun. And I found myself hooked into this. I think I read this in a whole day, and I devoured it. I just sat and I loved it, and it was so fun and so exciting, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So I'd certainly recommend it. I definitely want to carry on with the series, and I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing more of their adventures. The only element I wasn't a huge fan of is that because it is set in the wartime, there is some discussion of tactical advantages and kind of things like that. I'm not a huge fan of battle scenes or a huge fan of fight scenes, so for me that didn't really add anything to the story, but it also wasn't a bad element. Overall, it was just kind of an okay part of it. But their conversations, their love, their fun was just what made this so beautiful, and I can't recommend that element more highly. So if you want a really great fantasy of manners story, certainly try checking out this book. Even if you didn't love Uprooted by her, then I would still recommend this because I didn't either, but this one is way better. So I'm really looking forward to more in this series. I'm definitely intrigued by the Pyre and the continuation of that series, but I don't think I'll ever want to read more by Susan Cooper. So yeah, those are my thoughts on those 3 books. Please do let me know down below if you've read any of them and what you thought of them, or if you are interested in reading them yourselves. Let me know. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.